My first guests today are David Lee and Steve Lee from International Podcast Day. Dave and Steve, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Doing well, Jeffrey. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Doing wonderful, and this is going to be so much fun. I really appreciate the offer to come on.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm really excited to learn so much about International Podcast Day. It's coming up this year on September 30th, isn't it?
Yep, International Podcast Day is an annual event. We held our first podcast day last year, 2014, so we're already in the planning stages for this next coming year. And International Podcast Day was something that was sort of a brainchild of Steve. Steve and I have been podcasting since 2007. If you head over to netcaststudio.com, that is the network that Steve runs and that I co-host on, and we've been doing a tech show called The Waves of Tech since 2007. And one day, and Steve can elaborate on the story as well, he was driving around and heard a radio advertisement for, say, National Pancake Day or National, whatever that day is. And he goes, you know what, we need a day where internationally we can come together and celebrate all things podcasting. Celebrate it as a listener, celebrate it as a content creator, and that's exactly what Steve did. And so we formulated the idea. He's the founder, I'm the co-founder behind International Podcast Day, and it's a day dedicated just for that, for everybody to come together to celebrate all things podcasting, to promote shows, to provide ratings, to host different meetups nationwide and also internationally. And that's, like I said, we're in the planning stages for the second Podcast Day event. It's a fantastic cause, and we encourage everybody to check out internationalpodcastday.com.
And what kind of things can I do as a podcaster for International Podcast Day?
Really, the way we've kind of done it is kind of open structure, and it's really up to you. Although we have provided some idea and thought behind it, what we really looking for is people to be creative each year into how they're doing promotion and how they're discussing various issues and topics, but the real important thing is to really get out there to communities that have never heard of podcasting and get them involved.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, on our internationalpodcastday.com, our website, we have a series of suggestions, but ultimately what we say is it's really up to you. We just want you, as a listener of a show, of a podcast or a show, to introduce someone new. We want to start the conversation is kind of our tagline in 2014. You can grab your mic and camera and ask somebody about what's their favorite podcast. You can share that response on your social media. We hosted a number of events last year. I know a number of our podcasting buddies held events, started new shows also on Podcast Day. We provide free banner images for the website to promote it. We had a number of our friends and colleagues change their social media images to support International Podcast Day. There's just really a host of different things that you can do. Subscribe to a new show, talk about it using hashtag Podcast Day. And, we also encourage, if you're not a podcaster, why don't you become a podcaster? So really, Jeff, we have left it open-ended as far as how do you want to celebrate it. We just ask that you build the Podcast Day community and make podcasting the focus.
And that seems so easy to do. I mean, really, any day of the year can be podcasting day because it is so easy these days to listen to and to subscribe to some podcasts. I think it's fantastic right now that every single iOS device out there has the ability to listen and create podcasts. Let me ask you, what's your favorite podcast player out there on your phone?
I'm using actually the iOS podcasting app.
Yeah, I'm using the same thing. I'm using the native iOS podcasting app. It's what works for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Amazon Kindle Fire that I also have the Podcast Addict app, and I use it sparingly, but I do use it. But typically, I always have my iPhone with me in my pocket. So, but I've heard great positive things. We all of our shows and what we do is on Stitcher, and there's there's so many different apps out there, but I prefer the native podcast app. I notice for me, it's super user-friendly, and it's easily accessible. It's right on my phone.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I love the fact that everything syncs up. It is so easy to subscribe to shows. I do all my subscribing on my computer on iTunes, and then all I have to do is pick up my phone or my iPad, and everything is there. Everything downloads. Everything syncs. And if you're out there listening, all you have to do is just basically look at your phone. If you're running iOS 8, you have that podcasting app on there, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And one of the things that I did as part of podcast day is that I would ask somebody, "Hey, what podcast are you listening to?" If they say, "Hey, what is a podcast?" and I say, "Do you have a iPhone?" "Yeah, I sure do." "Okay, let me." And they graciously give me their phone. I bring up the podcasting app. It's native, of course. It's easy to find and say, "What are you interested in? Are you interested in soccer? You interested in some sort of sports? Is it comedy? Is it education? Is it news, politics, religion, science, culture, whatever it is?" And I just search and I say, "Hey, if you're interested in this, subscribe." Boom. And it's really that easy. And I think that's what the beauty of podcasting. One of the things we try to encourage with Podcast Day is listening to podcast is super easy. And by promoting it and saying that it is a on demand, you can pause it. You're not going to miss anything. If you forget to DVR a show, you're not getting it until maybe the next season. And if you turn off the radio, say to go inside to fill up some gas at the gas station, you're going to miss the interview you're going on with your favorite sports player. With podcasting, none of that is a reality. You have complete control, and I think that's one of the huge things we try and press while promoting the podcast industry.
I just love the fact that there are industries out there that are now copying podcasts. I mean, let's take Netflix, for instance. Recently, they just dropped their season 3 of House of Cards, all 13 episodes. There's a lot of podcasters out there right now that are taking 5 or 6 or 7 shows and basically dumping them all at once. So you can binge watch a video podcast, or you can find a show that you want, and in a matter of a weekend, you can listen to 20 or 30 episodes. It is really, really easy to become a podcast listener.
One of the torches I think we're going to pick up for this year for International Podcast Day is to really get the word out there and to get Google involved to have some kind of native application for its Android devices. That's one area that I think the Android user is really suffering, is they have no native way. And if they see it on their phone, well, then they're going to subscribe to podcasts. If they've never known what a podcast is, they don't know to go get an app to listen to them. So it's really important that Google really picks up their pace and really comes up with something native for podcasting.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because you're mentioning Google. There's a lot of teachers out there that are in Google schools using Google Apps for education. Let's say that I was a teacher and I was teaching in a room filled with Chromebooks. What are some of the ways that I can listen to a podcast on my Chromebook using native desktop browsers or Chrome browsers?
Well, certainly the most non-preferential way is, of course, going to the website, but of whatever the podcast is. But that's part of the issue, is discovery. And one of the other things that we've done to help that discovery discrepancy that you're talking about, we've also launched twothumbsupmedia.com, which is a podcast directory service to look up various sites and information. But a Chromebook makes it real difficult without apps, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The creation of podcasts is also something that teachers are looking into. What advice would you guys give educators out there who are saying, look, maybe for Educational Podcasting Day, I want my kids to create some kind of media and put it out? What do you guys suggest for even for students to use?
What, in terms of the recording, in terms of getting it initialized?
In terms of recording.
It's a good question, because they can do it from such a basic level. Although with Chromebook, it might be a little difficult. However, there's so much free stuff out there today. When we started in 2007, it wasn't the most simplest of things to really get a podcast going. But certainly they could use Audacity and a USB headset or a ATR 2100 microphone. Total cost of everything, what, $50, $60, and record it, and then learn how to, do their post-processing and launch it. I think those steps could be very simplistic, and they should probably be documented.
I think there's a lot of teachers that are out there right now that are looking for ways to get into this or learn how to create video media. I know whenever people ask me, I've had a couple of questions of, you have an iPad cart, how do I podcast? Or I have a MacBook Airs, or I have iMacs, how do I get into podcasting? And the microphone you just mentioned is an absolute fabulous one, and I think we'll put it on the show notes here. I usually tell people to go out and get either something like an AT-2005, which is the mic that I'm using here, or also get an iRig mic. I think the iRig mics are fantastic, and you can plug those directly into an iPad or a phone or an iPod, And I think the iRig mics are $30, $40, depending on where you find them, maybe even less at Amazon. But
It's a
you
good
can
point
easily
because
get it.
for my mobile setup, I use my iPhone with the camera connection kit with the ATR 2100 plugged into it, and then use what's the iOS app that records?
Boss Jock?
Pardon
Yeah,
me?
Boss Jock.
BossJock.
Boss Jock is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the big thing, if you're going to start podcasting, I remember Steve and I used to have an old headset. It was a Microsoft brand. I can't even remember what the name of it was. And it was USB right to here, and it worked. But I've also seen podcasters, the first thing out of the gate, they're slapping out $400 or $500 for the microphone. You don't necessarily need the top end things to get going in your podcast. You need content. You need a creative spirit. You need to be comfortable behind the mic, and you have to be comfortable enough with yourself to get behind there. And as long as you have the equipment, like you have the mic and you have the recording programs in order, and you've done your homework in building your website and different things like that, I think that's what you need to get started, is just that basic entry-level podcasting kit to kind of spring-load you into, okay, now that I have the systems in place, how do I work on developing the content? How much prep do I need to put in? How much post-show editing do I need to do? So just on the surface, I think a lot of us can get started really early, but in order to improve that over time, that's obviously going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more resource, some dedication. Absolutely working with you, Jeff, to get the insights on how to build the website properly. A variety of things like that are like the infrastructure background related things that all podcasters need, but that going into it you don't necessarily think you need up front, but you do. So in order to keep it going too, I mean, we've been podcasting since 2007, and it's hard to maintain. We've been doing it for 8 years, but every week there's something new to talk about in tech for us. In every week there's something new to talk about podcasting. And I'm sure it's the same way with education, because on our tech show, about, I don't know, every 5th or 6th show, we're talking about something educationally related with technology. So with that dynamic industry, I know that there's going to be topics out there in the educational in ed tech that are going to need to be talked about. And I think it's a perfect avenue that you're going down here.
And that's absolutely why we started the show here. There's a lot of people that are saying, well, where do I find these things? How do I find these things? And, we put together a website here. Let me see if I can bring it up here. But it's, essentially it's shop.teachercast.net. It's my little Amazon store here. But literally on here, I have links to every single piece of equipment that I have and I recommend, from my microphones to my mixers to iPads to you name it. There are a ton of stuff here. Everything that you use goes directly to Amazon, so that way that's where your transaction goes. But it's over at shop.teachercast.net. And, again, the questions always come into me, and I'm sure you guys get this too. Can a classroom podcast for free? And my answer is usually, sure you can, but for $50 you can have a lot of good stuff, right?
No, that's yeah. I'll let you take this, Steve. That's a perfect answer, and that was the same thing I would say.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, and I think we're all in agreement with that. Is absolutely you can do anything for free. But you really want some quality, because you're teaching, right? And so you want the presentation and the absorption from the students or the teachers that they might be talking to be well received, and not something that they're going to pull out their earbuds and throw away. So you got to do that. I think the other part of this is also not necessarily to get too wrapped up about the tech, because the tech has become so much simpler nowadays. But it's also to understand, and if we're talking about students, it's the whys and the process and the hows. And I think it's really important that they understand those details and the flows of how you get from point A to point B for an educational process.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating when you get absorbed and sucked into and scared, in essence, about the tech behind it. And I know plenty of podcasters, and if any podcaster is honest, over time they've learned how to have a better workflow. They've learned which equipment's working, which mixer to use. Okay, I want to abandon that. I want to move something else. And so it's just, in essence, like in the classroom, I see it is, you have these steps. You have to learn this before you can move to the next step. And then you continue to build that foundation. And that's one of the big things that we can say as podcasters, and in understanding our workflow and what equipment works, what doesn't, which programs you're comfortable with. Don't be afraid to mix it up, but also don't be afraid to go back to what you're doing if it's working for you. Find your workflow that's going to produce a quality product at the end of the day for you, something you're comfortable doing.
And that's such good advice, because can you podcast for free? Yes. I know people that started off on WordPress.com or some free site. They took their audio file, they put it up in Google Drive, put it all together, and yes, they had a free website with all of this stuff. And then because they wanted to really expand, they had to completely scrap their website, start somewhere else, completely find audio hosting. And I know with myself, I mean, we've done over 500 episodes or so here on TeacherCast, and it is constantly evolving from audio to video. Mm-hmm. I'm just sitting here looking at this. Like, this is sitting here. This was my first mixer that I used, the Behringer 802. And
very nice.
I'm sitting here on the floor is the 1202, which is a little bit bigger for 4 mics, and I gave that one away, and I'm actually sitting here next to the, what is this called, the 1802, which has 16 channels. And so you're constantly evolving here. Now, not saying that a classroom teacher has to go out and get that for their kids, right? Again, simple technology, simple microphones. You don't need to go through all those details. But if you are a teacher out there that's looking for some good equipment, something like, a Behringer 802 or a 1202 really can get it good. I know I always recommend the iRig mics, or if you're looking for something more stable for the classroom, I usually recommend either the Blue Yeti mics or the Snowball mics. And I like the Snowball mics because they're lightweight, they're portable. I've seen classrooms, I don't know if you guys seen this, but I've seen classrooms where they've had the Snowball mics hung upside down in the ceiling and everything was wired outside. So that way all the teacher had to do was go on and flip a switch on the computer, and everybody in the room was able to be picked up by the audio mic.
One thing I think I bring to light too is the extreme. And I'll use us as an example. Over time, we've continued to build the studio up in what we're doing. So, we have $1,000, PreSonus mixer. We have Dolby processors and high-def cameras, although I'm not on them now. But we have a lot of equipment. And does that necessarily make our podcast better? No, it doesn't. It gives me more options, and I'm able to do a lot of different things, but it necessarily doesn't make it better. And that's where it relates to. You can still do it on a budget. But more importantly, on that budget is the content, which is of most value.
And let's wrap up with that conversation right there. The content that we're talking about, whether you are an educator at your house and you want to make a podcast, or if you're at your school, it really does come down to what are people listening to? The idea of taking your 30 kids and creating something out of it. I'll give you a good example here. I teach a course in rock and roll history, and the last project, our final project, they give them like a month to do. And they have iPads, they have Chromebooks, they have their iMacs, and their job is to make me a 10-minute podcast based off of a decade of the year. So we usually break off into like 5 groups. We have 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then, today's music. Every group gets a decade. And that's the only directions that I give them. They need to make a 10-minute podcast of, the sports, the music, the news, the politics, the athletic, everything that goes on. Mm-hmm. And I just let them have all the free reign to create some amazing content. And these kids come out and they produce really good stuff. Now, I help them learn about audio, and we learn about editing and GarageBand and stuff. But when you give the kids the freedom to do amazing things come out of the kids.
That's true. And I can relate to that as a podcaster, whether I'm about to turn 34 years old, unless we're talking about a school kid. When you have that passion, when you're intrigued and you're interested in what you're talking about, whether it's the 80s, 90s, now, whatever genre of music it is, for us it's all about tech. We talk about tech every week on our show. And as we begin to launch the International Podcast Day, we're going to be talking about podcasting every week as well. So that passion is inside of you. It's about portraying that. It's about being comfortable. It's about being prepared. It's about knowing your audience and engaging with that audience. And it sounds like with what you've experienced with your kids, that is in essence contagious. It's contagious for me just sitting here listening to how powerful of a story that is. And I think educators and teachers can also pull. My girlfriend is a 5th grade teacher. I know she's inspired daily by her kids. from their achievements and what they've been able to accomplish year after year, and to see them, now in high school and junior high and things like that. That's inspirational, and I get a lot of good feeling from that. And so I think us as podcasters can learn a lot looking outside. When you see a 10, 12, 14-year-old boy or girl doing podcasting and really enjoying it, embracing it, that's a good sign of good things to come for not only the educational system but also podcasting as a whole.
We go through an entire semester together with this course, and at the end of the year I spring this podcasting thing on them, and immediately they go, oh, that's a lot of work. But there's something that happens to these kids during that process. They start to smile, and then they start to have fun, and then they start to enjoy themselves. And then they start to edit music, which is different. That's where the hard part comes back in. Mm-hmm. But the actual act of trying things out and doing a skit and doing a voiceover and having fun and being able to take the iPads out in the hallway and do silly things with them to create this content, you're right. That's your word. It's contagious. The kids have a good time and they feed off of each other. And then because it's so easy to share music and share videos and put it up on Google Drive and stuff, to share with them what the previous class did and say, look, I want you to go one better. Technology has improved, so you guys can make a better project than this. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty amazing. It really, really is. And if you're an educator out there and if you're making a podcast, absolutely, just go for it. Reach out to us if you need to over here on the TeacherCast network. You can find me at feedback@teachercast.net or out on Twitter @TeacherCast. I'd love to help you. I'd love to be able to share some of these great tips and tricks with you guys. Before I let you go, I have a website here that I'm pulling up here that I really want to have you guys talk to me about. I believe it's called NetCast Studio. Could you guys talk to us a little bit about what this is?
Wow. I wasn't expecting this, but thank you very much. When Dave and I first began, it was also with one of my other sons, we just had a website, Ways of Tech, and we only had one show. And as we became more and more popular, I was being approached by a lot of different podcasters. How can I get involved with what you guys are doing? So we started developing this network, and now we have approximately 10 total shows, and we have a lot of fun through tech, history, sports, women's issues, all kinds of things. Please check it out, netcaststudio.com. Thank you for bringing that up.
And let's say that somebody was in their car tomorrow and they were driving and they were looking for a great NetCast Studio podcast. Where would you suggest them find it?
Well, there's many, many, many ways. Certainly, number one, if you're on Android or iOS, you can download our app. It's called NetCast Studio. Otherwise, you can certainly use the embedded podcast app on the iOS device and just search for NetCast Studio or search for any of our independent shows, Ways of Tech, Busy Ladies, Tech of Sports, and on and on and on. And certainly there's also Stitcher.
What do you guys think of Stitcher? I'm just curious. As a podcaster or as a content producer, are there a lot of people that are on Stitcher these days?
I get some stats from Stitcher. They're not the greatest over at Stitcher. For me, I don't use it, but I attempt to have our shows wherever they can be. Mm-hmm. My only thing that I just don't like is they lower the bit quality of your podcast, and they just don't sound as good. But they do
I think
purposes.
Yeah, I think from a podcaster, from a content creator, you hear a lot of that. Okay, they've messed with the audio, they've lowered the bit rate, they've done some of these things, so it's not truly the product that you want to present. But from a consumer standpoint, I know Stitcher is off the charts. People use it because, as we talked about on one of our most recent podcasts, 42% of the smartphone industry has Android-based operating systems. So there's potentially 53% of podcast listeners that are using something like Pocket Cast or Overcast or Stitcher as their platform to get it. So it's a medium in which you can garnish a lot of stats and a lot of listeners, and you can get more exposure. But I know on the content producer side, we're a bit hesitant. We're not necessarily always pleased with the product at the end of the rainbow, per se. So again, I don't use it because I use the native podcasting app on iOS, but I do know several people that utilize Stitcher as a means of subscribing and searching for podcasts. So I think it's that middle ground. It's good for consumers. It's it's decent for the podcast producers, with those few exceptions that I mentioned.
If there was one platform, let's say you are a teacher and you maybe were running the media club or you were in charge of creating the podcast for your high school, and iTunes is not going to be one of your answers. What's the one place that you could try to publish that was easy, that was safe, that was that good introduction? And again, you can't use iTunes. I'm going to take the obvious one out of the equation.
Well, first of all, I think what you're doing should get together with if you have computer science courses at your high school, and have them create an app for your podcast that you're developing. I think that might be a lot kind of cool, and integrate the tool. Probably the easiest, I guess it depends where you're hosting your media. If you're using Libsyn or Blueberry, whatever, you can just upload it and use their feed and their post if you like.
Sounds pretty easy. If you are out there listening and you're an educator, definitely check them out. I want to bring up your website one more time here. Sorry, that's my website. internationalpodcastday.com. September 30th. If you're an educator out there, please take a moment and do something special on that day. Listen to a podcast. Introduce your podcast. One more time, guys, where can we find more information out on social media about International Podcast Day?
You can find our Facebook page. Just search for International Podcast Day. You can also find we're on Google Plus. You can add us there, and also on Twitter, it is INTL Podcast Day. INTL Podcast Day. And don't forget, if you're talking to us or if you want to have a conversation, you can always tag us. I'm managing that site, so I'm very active. I'm always on there. But also, don't forget to use hashtag Podcast Day. That is this last year I didn't mention, but for 14 hours we were trending on Twitter using that hashtag Podcast Day and hashtag International Podcast Day. So if you're going to conversate with us, make sure you tag us. Love to see that, and also use that hashtag.
Dave, Steve, thank you so much for coming on, and good luck with International Podcasting Day. I know I'm going to be excited about it, and I know I'm going to be helping out. And if you're out there listening, you guys can too. We'll be right back from our new show, educationalpodcasting.today.
National Podcast Day is September 30th. But what is National Podcast Day? It's pretty simple, and you can help spread the word. National Podcast Day is dedicated to promoting podcasting worldwide through public engagement. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved with National Podcast Day? It's easy. Head over to nationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. But ultimately, these options are endless. Remember, September 30th, nationalpodcastday.com, and let's start the conversation.